So this is the Emmaselle II, has a 188-inch wing, weighed 61 pounds. I flew it under the AMA LMA-1 and had a Hacker A150. Flew many of the flights, 90% of the flights, on a Castle 160 speed controller. I was flying at 10S at the time and decided to upgrade it to 12S, and I put the Jetty Spin 300 on it and had quite a few successful flights with that speed controller. The biggest thing, folks, I want to make really clear is I don't mind. I mean, I hate to say it. Everybody's freaked out thinking that I was really upset the plane crashed. I was more thankful nobody got hurt. This potentially could have been an absolute disaster. And I'll get into that a little bit more in this video. But, folks, I got to tell you, planes can be rebuilt. You know, the fact I could have hurt somebody, and I'm going to get into this a little bit deeper later on, was just absolutely terrifying. So the plane after the crash looked like this. The wings are basically gone. The fuselage is in really good condition. I mean, this plane just needs new wings, a new speed controller, a new engine, any new motor, and it'll fly probably in 2025. It is a big airplane, folks. People don't realize how big this airplane is and just how awesome. I mean, it flew like a big Cub, folks. It was just an incredible airplane. Okay, folks, now let's get into what brought down my airplane. So this is my basic layout here, okay? It's a 12S2P system for the motor and speed controller. I use Futaba S-Bus with both S-Bus servos and digital servos. I use the SBD ones to convert the S-Bus signal down to the standard digital signal. I had 2 receiver batteries going through a switcher, basically, that would pick the best battery. So basically, by the book, I thought I was 100% covered. Excuse me. I never imagined that I could have an ESC fire so bad that it would melt together the 2 wires that power the ESC that would then dead short the receiver. Okay, now there was no BEC on this ESC. So I didn't need to remove like the red wire like you would when you're having a BEC ESC with separate radio batteries. If I would have removed that red wire, I don't think my plane would have crashed. Unless when the negative and the signal would have melted together, that still could have taken out the signal in my receiver. But basically the ESC fire was so bad that it took out my receiver by dead shorting those wires together. Back in the day, folks, we used to always have 2 receivers in our big airplanes, but everybody thought, well, as long as we got 2 batteries and some type of device to pick the best battery, we only needed 1 receiver. And on big electrics, in my humble opinion, I'm never going to do that again. Okay. So when we look at the wires that burnt, and I've got some video coming up, folks, that will show a little bit more of that went on with the actual crash. But these are the wires that came out of the ESC that basically goes back to my receiver. You know, the receiver has to power the ESC. That's how your throttle works. Well, these are the wires that caught on fire and melted. And that's pretty messed up. The best thing I could have done, folks, is have a receiver for the ESCs on the big airplanes and then a receiver for flying the aircraft. If I would have had a separate receiver just for the ESC and it would have burned up, I still would have landed this airplane and had no chance of getting near people or hurting anybody. Okay. Now, why did the ESC blow up? I had this weird phenomenon going on, and it had never happened to me. When I showed up to SEF, twice I had the motor basically go into where it went out of timing, and it made that screech noise, and I had to keep resetting the ESC to know, basically it set it to auto timing so it could see that it was a 20 pole motor. In hindsight, I should have grounded the airplane and took it home and figured out what was going on. But I didn't realize my ESC was slowly going bad. So I flew another 4 or 5 times, no problem. And then the next time it went out of sync again or out of timing. And then I reset the timing and it flew fine. And I'll talk a little bit more about the crash in a minute. But basically, while I was flying, it went out of timing. And right there in the middle of this picture is where the ESC used to live. And you can see where it melted my fake cylinders a little bit. But the fire is really big. And you'll see in the video in a minute, the flames are really coming out of the top of the cowling. But essentially, folks, on big electrics, I'm never going to do it again without having a separate receiver just for the ESC in case the ESC takes out the receiver. Here's what the ESC and the ABS mount that it was mounted to looks like, and those are two of the three. Those are the two leads that the batteries went into the ESC, and it vaporized those wires. It melted them. So I have no idea how many amps this thing was just melting down at, but it was just incredible what happened with the ESC. It just basically blew up. Now, I'm not knocking Jetty. I have had one person reach out and said their 300 spin did the same thing, so I don't know much about that. Now, one thing I do want to address, because that's what my hacker looked like. It's all melted inside there. I had somebody ask me, was I really over-amping this motor? And I'd always ran 6,000 to 7,000 watts through this motor for over 180, 190 flights. I knew I was going to put about 210 amps through it. And I flew it 2 or 3 times, landed it, and the motor was not that hot at all. I mean, it was hot, but it wasn't like melting down. So I want people to realize that it wasn't the motor that just melted up there. You could hear this whole motor and everything when the props started to quit spinning. I could tell in the air that I had a problem. I knew that the ESC had gone out of timing, but it never happened in the air. It happened when I ran it up on the ground. So now we're going to get into the video that crashed. My friend Eamon Kelly, who's a drone pilot, has always been following my Emmaselle when it flies, and I'll show some of that video at the end of this. But right here, this is going to be at normal speed, okay? You can see the plane just hits the ground, and right here I thought it was done. I thought the landing gear would blow up and the plane would stop, but the landing gear was built so good that it survived that flying into the ground. Now, I stopped the video here because some people were diving out of the way when it was hitting the tents, and I just don't want to show that on my video. So here I'm slow the video way down. My buddy Eamon said, "You've got smoke," and this is when I started to turn left. And I knew that, now I couldn't see the smoke that good from the flight line, but he's behind me. So I started turning left, and right about here is where I lose the radio. This plane always had a tendency to turn right just a little bit. I had trimmed it out with the ailerons, but when I lost my receiver, the flying surfaces went to neutral, and they were balanced flying surfaces. So the plane started to do that little bit of a right turn. Now, folks, honestly, I had the nose way down at this point because I wanted to fly it down into the ground. Well, one is to keep airspeed. The other one was I would rather crash this airplane than to let it get near the pits. But my biggest nightmare ever and the most uncomfortable feeling I've ever had of total helplessness is when the plane hit the ground there and it survived that hitting that hard. I thought the landing gear would collapse. It would be over. It might slide to a stop. But when it kept rolling here, it completely freaked me out. And I actually hit my brakes on my radio to full, just hoping that maybe the radio came back for a second. Okay, now look, I'm not going to roll this video. And actually, my buddy's coming in so fast with his drone, he doesn't actually get a good video of it hitting the tents because he has to pull up. He's coming in at like 50 mile an hour. But there is a couple of people that had to jump out of the way, and I don't want to show that. That makes it very uncomfortable for me. Now, this next piece of the video is actually from his drone. He had landed his drone, and this is everybody pulling it out from the tent because there's a fire under the cowling. And, excuse me. And you can see the smoke here. Now, I'm running down the flight line. This is 100 yards. There I am right there, popping up. I got the hat on. And, you know I had a fire under there. And this is another thing. My fire extinguisher was back in my tent. I always have 2 fire extinguishers with me, but they were both in my tent. And in a minute, you're going to see one of my best buddies, Berger. He comes flying up on his little electric motorcycle with a fire extinguisher. And this is another reason, folks, I think all of us should have fire extinguishers at our tents. But you can see I had a pretty good flame coming out of the top of the cowling there. And believe it or not, virtually nothing was really that damaged except the ESC. Here's my buddy Berger bringing me my fire extinguisher. And then promptly put out the fire. And folks, I'd be lying if this didn't scare the living hell out of me. I have flown model aircraft since the early 80s, or actually since about 79 is when I started flying gliders. And my biggest fear when I got into big airplanes was ever getting near the pits. And for this to happen to somebody who's a safety freak like I am has made me rethink the entire way that I build airplanes in the hobby. It really has. So here is basically what it looks like now. And, you know, the fire did most of the damage at the top of the cowling, and I'll show a picture of that in a minute. But overall, and the bungees on the right landing gear were all just torn up because I have bungees like on a Cub or something. And they were just almost destroyed. So the plane didn't really sit level because of the hard impact. It did damage the bottom jugs on my fake twin row radio. But folks, I'm more happy that nobody got hurt. I mean, to me, here you're seeing a picture of what it looked like. The cowling will be easy to build, a new cowling. I'm not afraid of that. Building the wings, you know, I designed them myself. I've got the drawings. I'll build new wings. There was a slight tear on the side of the fuselage. But essentially, folks, I just completely lucked out. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is I did take out 2 tents. I destroyed 2 tents, and I did hit another guy's 3D plane. And I damaged the cowling and destroyed his rudder. Now, everybody that was impacted by this, I offered to replace the tents, and they said no way. They were old tents. They're just going to throw them away before they go home. And I said, no, at least let me give you $100 each. And they said, nope. The guy's plane I hit, I gave him all of my information and said, look, if I got to buy you a new fuselage or if I got to buy you a new plane, let me know. And he said, no problem. I'll get with you. I still haven't heard from him. So I'm hoping he doesn't just, you know, forget me. And, because I really want to replace whatever I damaged to his plane. Folks, anytime I damage somebody else's property in this sport or this hobby, I want to be there to help them fix it. So, folks, I want to end this video with just some footage of it flying. This was at CEF this year. My friend Eamon Kelly is in the chase drone. The plane had fake exhaust that would flicker just like the real exhaust, you know, ports showing, you know, flames coming out of them. It was really easy to fly. It was the best airplane I've ever designed myself and flown ever. And it will fly again. It's just I'm going to need a new motor, a new ESC, 2 new wings, and I'm going to go through, probably uncover the fuselage, believe it or not, and recover the whole airplane because I do want to inspect the inside of the fuselage to make sure everything's good inside there after that kind of an impact. You know, I got to fix the landing gear. But folks, that's it. So thanks for watching the video. Have a great day, and please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Rock on. Have an awesome day. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye. Hey folks, it's Dag. So this is going to be the final report on the crash of my Emmaselle. I've done a bunch of research and really dug into things to try to really understand the accident a little bit better and what I would do different in the future and what I would, you know, recommend people just to consider. You know, this could have turned out a lot worse, but it didn't. So if you don't know the Emmaselle II, basically it's my own design. I spent about a year designing it in CAD and did a bunch of 3D stuff, and then about 2 years building it. It's a 188-inch wing, about 61 pounds, had about 7,000 watts that would fly great on, and had a whole bunch of flights. And a lot of people don't realize how big this aircraft was. It was an awesome flying airplane. At 61 pounds, it had a wing loading, or a cube wing loading, excuse me, very much in between a glider and a sport plane. It definitely was not a really, really heavy plane in any way. It probably could have been 100 pounds more and still flown with that wing loading. So if you don't know the whole story, you'll have to go back and watch the original crash report. But basically, the airplane had an onboard fire that took out my receiver. In this video, you can see I was starting to turn away from the flight line, but then once the radio was dead, it slowly turned to the right, and it impacted the ground. And I want to talk about this wing flex you see there in a minute. So the fire was pretty hot that was inside it. You can see the damage to the bottom of the engine cylinders or the jugs there from it impacting the ground. Now, those are 3D printed, you know, dummy radial engine there. The right landing gear left in this picture here is actually cocked out quite a bit, so you can see that later in the video. So really what caused the entire accident, excuse me, was an onboard fire of the electronic speed control that melted the receiver wires. I've gotten a lot of people reaching out to me that didn't watch the first crashed video and understand that this was not an ESC failing and it taking out the signal to my receiver. It was a fire by the ESC that melted the wires that go from my throttle to the receiver. Here you can see a little bit different picture. The ESC used to live right there in between the second row jugs right there. And the fire was intense enough that it melted the insulation on the wire, bringing into contact the signal and ground, or the positive and ground. Again, this ESC did not have an onboard BEC, so it did not need to have the red wire removed on the receiver that went back to my throttle channel on my radio. I've gotten, again, a bunch of emails, a bunch of private messages, and even people posting on YouTube information that proves they never watched the original crash video, because I detail very, very clearly that there was no BEC on the ESC, the electronic speed control. And here, folks, is actually the mount that the ESC is hanging on, and the fire, or when the ESC shorted out from going out of timing, which I cover in a crash video, the original crash video, was intense enough to melt those 10 gauge wires. So there was a lot of heat and a lot of fire. Now, I want to break down my control system again, because this is another thing that confused people. And people, I'm trying to make this very clear. You've got to pay attention and understand what I'm talking about here before you start telling me what went wrong where you're completely wrong. So essentially, folks, there were 2 redundant batteries for the receiver going through an Elite T70. I misspoke in my first video saying that was a T30. It's a T70. So it picks the best battery to keep the receiver always powered. Remember, there's no BEC on the ESC that's powering my receiver. There's 2 independent batteries. Then there's 2 batteries for the servo systems that are S-bus, and they were separated out by their own independent BECs that powered all of my servos. So in theory, if one battery or one BEC went bad, I still had control of at least one aileron and the elevator, or one of the brakes, or both of the brakes. Another thing that was confusing, I think, for people to understand is that this was probably a 1 in a million chance. If I redid this airplane today, I would not change hardly anything except that wire that runs from the ESC. I would have that come back to its own independent receiver, or have it come back to the SBD1, which is the decoder for S-bus to the normal servo type communication. That way, if that wire would have melted, it only would have taken out one of the servo batteries or that system on one side of the airplane. I still would have had complete control. So in the future, I'm either going to have a second receiver, or I'm going to run that throttle wire through one of my SBD1s. That way, if it melts together, all it does is take out one half the airplane. Now, again, I get a lot of people that are just not watching the video saying that you should never fly an ESC that has a BEC without having a secondary battery for your receiver. I actually had 2 redundant batteries for my receiver. Okay, 2 redundant batteries for the onboard systems, including the brakes. And this was just 1,000,000 to 1. What are the chances an ESC would catch on fire and actually melt these wires together? I can't find anybody that's ever happened to, and it's the first time it's ever happened to me. Now, I don't know what caused the ESC to actually go bad. In the crash video, I explained it kept going out of timing on a, basically a ESC that can handle 300 amps going to a motor that can hold 10,000 watts. Nothing was really being overrun. Nothing was really being pushed that hard. But we'll never know why the ESC did what it did, because it's toast. It's gone. Now, I want to show you here another thing that's 1,000,000 to 1 chance. The impact we have here. Watch how much this wing flexes. The fact that my carbon fiber spar right here did not break is just 1,000,000 to 1. I mean, I don't know how many degrees of deflection there is, but it is ginormous. And the fact that the landing gear survived that impact are 1,000,000 to 1. So, when I think about, the ESC catching on fire, I think about it surviving the ground because I built the landing gear too strong. I mean, I built this like full scale landing gear. It's a 4130 chromoly steel that I TIG welded myself. And it's super light, but it's a lot stronger than I ever thought it would be. I never thought with the way the plane was coming down that it would survive hitting the ground. I thought the plane was going to be toast when it hit the ground. The fact that it jumped back off the ground and then kept rolling, of course I had no radio, so I had no brakes, was really, it was really concerning to me. Folks, this was the perfect storm. The more I did research into it and talked to a whole bunch of my other pals and did some testing on the RX system. So here you can see the right landing gear, or left in this picture, is really tweaked out there. You can see the damage to the jugs that hit the ground. What are the chances of a plane this big hitting the ground that hard and surviving it? It's crazy. Now, here's the bungees. If you dig around inside these bungees, you can find all kinds of the little rubber bands that are ripped and coming out of it. So I actually want to start closing this down, folks, because I just wanted to do a final report on it. And it's 1,000,000 to 1 that those wires melting together brought this plane down. Any other fire, any other place in the airplane, I would have had control at least to land it safely and let it burn in the runway. Because that's ultimately what I thought was happening, folks. Now, I've had a couple of people say it was crazy I was flying this airplane with some of the problems I was having. The worst thing I thought I would have was a dead stick, and I was keeping it away from people because of that. So if it did fail and I had a dead stick, I'd land it. I never ever thought in my wildest dreams that with all the redundancy I had built into this, that I could actually lose control of the radio. So a little bit about the Emmaselle and its future. It just needs new wings. The fuselage needs a good inspection, but the plane will fly again. It's probably going to be middle of next year or maybe the end of 2025 before I really have the time and the funds to build the new wings. But the airplane will fly again. So basically I want to close, folks, with some flying of the plane and just, what it looked like at CEF before it crashed. So thanks, everybody. I'll just let you watch the plane here, and please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care and rock on, everybody. Bye-bye.